Hello and welcome back to the Music Room. I'm Duncan Taylor and behind me are a gorgeous pair of Magnepan 3.7i speakers, and at my feet is a number of fine amplifiers from brands around the business, and there's a great reason for this. The Music Room recently brought on Magnepan to join our new product offerings, and we, as always, want to get to know the brand and get to know the products as best we can. Now, these are the first dipole speakers that we've ever had in this listening room that we just completed this spring. So we're very excited, and we've been doing a lot of experimentation.
We've been learning about where to put these and how sound changes based on where they are. And we've adjusted the listening position to hear how that affects things too. We've also been trying different combinations of sources and cables to learn what sounds best.
In this video, we're turning our focus to the amplifiers, which is really a next major step for anyone trying to dial in a Magnepan system like we are. Now, Maggies, as everyone likes to call them, combine somewhat low sensitivity with extremely high resolution. So they require a little bit of amplifier guts to get going, but when they do, they can cast a spotlight on synergy or the lack of synergy in connected components, especially amplification. Among the Maggie community online, you'll find discussions about the perfect amplifier pairing, maybe discussed more than any other topic. So that's what we're doing here. The plan is to shoot out these amplifiers and take you along with us. You can see the process, but we'll spare you having to wait through all of the cable swapping and that kind of thing. For my raw notes, we'll leave a link in the description below. I think there's value to a raw reaction from a listening session, so those will be available, and through those notes you can actually kind of see what I was listening for. The meat of what we're trying to convey in this video is really the process. Everyone's ears and tastes are different, and the only way that you're going to find that perfect match made in heaven is to try things, and is to do some close comparison listening exercises just like we're doing today. You got to try a few things to know what you like. Now, for those of you with less time on your hands, we've got this video arranged in chapters. You can check them out in the video description below. There's links and you can jump around the video. That'll make it nice and quick. There's a lot more to setting up a perfect Maggie experience than just the positioning in the room, although that is very important.
For us, the next step is finding the right amplifier. And this isn't just a Maggie thing. Finding the right amp for your speakers is one of the essential audiophile tasks, regardless of what kind of speakers they are.
To build the highest performance and most synergistic system, you have to understand what, from the amplifier's perspective, is challenging about driving the speakers that you have. And then you want to find an amplifier that can handle those challenges and stay linear. Amplifiers are like weightlifters. They just want to push something, and ideally they want to push something consistent and even. However, most speakers, the load that they present on the amplifier is anything but even. It's wildly variable, some speakers more than others. This is expressed in impedance, and impedance is how difficult it is to push the cone at different notes. Now, you wouldn't want to add or remove weights to a weightlifter's bar while he's in the middle of a bench press stroke, would you? I mean, but that's what amplifiers are encountering when they're driving most normal speaker loads. In contrast, planar magnetics, their impedances are flat across the spectrum, all the way up. So it doesn't matter what they're playing, they're the same load. They're pretty much like a resistor on the amplifier, which is, the amplifier loves. The thing is, they are a pretty hefty resistor, so they require some current to get going, and you can't use the smallest watt amplifiers on these. But the bigger point is this even impedance across the spectrum allows the character of amplifiers to really shine through because it's a bit more leveled playing field for the amplifier. So Maggies tend to be kind to amplifiers in this specific way, but there is more to getting the most out of a Magnepan experience and system than just throwing a lot of current and high power at them. I mean, if that were the case, then the solution would be very easy. We just throw giant Class D amplifiers on here and call it a day. But Magnepans are a legendary hi-fi speaker for a very specific reason. They are revealing to the point of showing really anything that's being fed to them. like, yes, you can muddy them up and make them dull sounding when you connect bad gear to them, but their nature is really to show what's being fed to them as clearly as, a freshly washed window. Let's start talking about the amplifiers. We've got some great options available in the Music Room's used catalog, and I did some looking around and I grabbed what I think are 3 great options for this shootout. Now, I did want to give the amps, or the Maggies rather, plenty of power. So I was thinking for amps I would go with monoblocks. And there's a couple extra reasons why I might do that. Number 1, there's plenty available at the Music Room right now to choose from. But 2, I think that when you're going with Magnepans, you're choosing a speaker that performs above its price. And so it's always a great opportunity with something like that to invest a little bit more in the electronics.
And what better style of electronics for our task than monoblocks? Monos further even the playing field over stereo amps because they split the power supplies to individual channels. The left channel isn't influenced by the right's demands, and vice versa. I also thought we'd narrow this down by focusing on comparing different topologies. That will give us a solid step forward toward understanding what we like and hear in a broad sense.
So here's the list. We've got a solid state amp, we've got a tube amp, full tube, and we've got a solid state tube hybrid amp. Our transistor amp, or our solid state amp du jour, is our lovely Michi M8 monoblocks that have been our reference amps in the listening lab here. I think they're going to sound spectacular on the Maggies, and I really am looking forward to hearing what they can do. They offer the most power of the amps in the list, but their price is about the same as the next amps in the list, and I think the power supply design is similar.
The M8s use a ton of paralleled high-power transistors, 32 on each side to be exact, to achieve a monstrous 1800 watts per channel into 4 ohms. Their transformers are designed and built in-house, which is extremely rare in the hi-fi industry. They also have unique access to special capacitors made to their specifications, which play a role in the performance of the all-important power supply. The investment Michi has made in the development of these reference amplifiers is evident wherever you look, and like the Magnepans, they compete well above their price point.
The next amps are hybrids, and they're amps I know very well. I've heard them for years, but I haven't heard them actually on large Magnepan speakers. But they're made by our friends down the road in Colorado at PS Audio, and they're called the BHK 300 monoblocks.
The BHK 300s have been on the market for some time, and they're actually a common pairing for Magnepan speakers, which helped tip the scales for the choice of hybrid amp for this shootout. I really love these amps. They have huge current capability, and they have a musical kind of character. They have tubes on the input. They actually ship with 6922s, but they can power 7-volt tubes like the 7DJ8 as well. And they have some very special technology in the output circuit.
For tubes, I chose the Audio Research Reference 210 monoblocks that we've got in stock, and I've really been itching to hear these ever since I saw them come through on the Fresh Rivals page of our website. But even more so, I've been interested to hear how they would do on these Magnepans. People have been pairing Magnepans and Audio Research together since the very beginning of both companies.
These reference 210 monos can't necessarily be called vintage, but they are the oldest in the list. They're the most expensive originally, and they're the lowest powered, offering 210 watts per channel. But if I know anything about beefy tube power amps from Audio Research, and I do because I own one myself, I think the 210s will more than hold their own.
These came out in 2005, and they still represent a pinnacle of Audio Research design. They feature 6550 tubes, not just in the output section, but also in the driver stage, and they're the only amps in this list that are transformer coupled. The categories are bass and mid-bass, mid-range and treble, depth and width, and finally extras. Now there's no major rule of thumb here. You can have as many categories as you want. We'll just extend the amount of time it takes to do this exercise. So we'll stick with 4, and I think these are fairly self-explanatory, but I'll get into them in a bit more detail in the synopsis at the end.
The test tracks I put together for this exercise are really excellent, so I'm going to pop those up on screen here so you can see them. Hit pause if you need to take some time to take a screenshot or write them down. You can see I have them arranged based on what kind of feature might be special about that recording to help with specific things I'm listening for in this shootout.
Okay, we're just about set up, but first we got to go through a few technical issues. The Michi amps, compared to the others, are inverting, which means they invert the phase, and so when I switch to them, I've got to go to the DAC and remember to invert the polarity there. The second thing is the audio research amps are actually lower gain than the other two, and so besides volume matching, I've got to remember to bring down the volume of the subwoofers, because those are powered, and they're taking their information straight off the speaker taps, rather than an RCA.
Another thing to consider with the audio research amps is that they actually send the signal to the speakers, and by extension the subwoofer, out of the ground or the negative binding post, which, yes, is strange. I have an older audio research amp at home which does the same thing. So I've got to make sure that I have the REL subwoofer cable's positive leads connected to the black post at the amplifiers, and then I've got to invert the phase of the subs.
So that's it, but it just shows you that every amplifier is different, and you really want to level the playing field when you're doing a close comparison like this. All right, without further ado, let's get to it. This will take me an hour or two, but for you, it should go by in a flash. Let's get to shooting. Okay, it's done. We did it. And that was fun. You know, each of these amplifiers that I chose specifically for this shootout are incredible, and they're at this price, you know, everything is good. It just really comes down to the differences that we were able to observe. The Michi amps had the most even and natural bass response, but the PS Audio amps in certain places had this slam that was really fun. The audio research in the sub-bass region was a little round and soft, but up in the mid-bass region, the clarity was just wonderful, and it's something that reminds me of what I love about the 6550 output tube.
The BHK 300s had areas in the bass and mid-bass region where they mimicked the Michis, but in other areas they came off slightly thicker and more harmonic. The general mid-bass region was excellent, and overall, in the bass region, dynamics were the standout for the 300s.
The Michis had that kind of even-handedness across all the bass notes that really spoke to the amount of power available, but also the design of the power supply. The PS Audio and the Michi amps were pretty similar in this region, but one thing that stood out to me about the Michis was this strength of lower treble presentation that reminds me of the things that I love about listening to Magico or Wilson speakers with those great tweeters. The Michis were able to actually bring that out of the Maggies effortlessly.
The audio research in this range showed off its impressive soundstage width and image placement abilities. In the David Friedman track, I'm listening for his vibraphone's notes to naturally move across the instrument's general location, and the tube amps did well to portray that nuance. The PS Audio amps sounded a little more easygoing overall, with a silky top end. The Friedman track showed off a unique trait of the BHK's soundstaging. As the notes would move to the listener's right, they became more glowing and directly connected to the ear, seemingly pressurizing the space. The vividness was really fun and added to the listening experience.
The Michi amps seemed to change with every track, showing a little bit more than the other two, a level of resolution that, in combination with the Maggies, really served to pull out all these details and layers in the presentation. The vividness was there, especially on that David Friedman track, but it was evenly arranged. Now here's where the amps really stood out from each other, and where I think the resolution from the previous category kind of plays a role. The Debussy track in the track list is one of those that has you reaching for the dial because it's recorded very naturally without compression and with lots of dynamic range. And so the 3 amps actually had different presentations of depth from where the microphones might be placed in the hall.
The Michi amps put me the closest, and the audio research had me the furthest back, and it was a little too far. I was clearly missing some details, but sometimes this is a subtle characteristic of sound that will inform you that a new tube set might offer some improvement. The PS audio was right in the middle of the other 2 amps, depth-wise, and it was very interesting to jump back and forth between these amps to hear those perspectives change.
I do cover soundstage width, but to keep things moving, I'll refer you to my notes for that. There were clear differences, but what I was listening for actually was, interestingly, the shape of the soundstage, which I found to be a bit different between the 3 amps. This last category is a little thicker. Call these extras or essentials, but they're just things I find important in a hi-fi presentation. The first for me is an excellent phantom center image floating between the speakers whenever you've got a center panned vocalist presented. I'm listening for how big is it, how deep is it, how many layers, how much detail, that kind of thing. Timing is a very important quality of an amplifier, and it's you can observe subjectively timing differences in amplifiers. You can clearly measure them. If you ever look at a square wave measurement of a number of amplifiers, you see clear differences that must correlate to how it sounds, you know, when you're playing music through it. But good sense of timing is real obvious when you're comparing to an amplifier with poor sense of timing. It's something that you can just kind of hear. And lastly, inner detail is one of my favorite aspects of a great hi-fi stereo system. Inner detail is the ability to stay composed in the midst of a dense mix and show off maybe quieter but individual instruments that are kind of buried in that mix with some detail. The Bali Maya track on the tracks list is a great test track for this kind of thing. Now, not surprisingly, because of the way that they've been performing so far in the shootout, the Michi amps had the best timing and the best inner detail of the 3, followed closely by the PS audio. Now see the notes for the rest on inner detail. Remember, those are in the description below. And also try these tracks out at home on your own system. That Yoshi Horikawa track, for example, is a great test piece, and you can see where your system stacks up with that kind of really dense and busy presentation. I ended up hearing 3 very different perspectives here, all enjoyable, through these amplifiers and the Magnepans. This process of doing the work to try to find the perfect match for your ears and your system, it's just an essential audiophile task, but even more so when you're trying to set up an amazing Magnepan experience. Well, I hope this inspires you to do gear shootouts in your own listening system. And if you've got any questions about this process, hit us up in the comments below. For the Music Room, I'm Duncan Taylor, wishing you good shooting and happy listening.